So you'll hear this argument from some conservatives, but mainly anarcho-capitalists, also known as ANCAPs, and libertarians.
Well, first, I want to take a look at this picture he's using as a background, because I think it beautifully illustrates one of the common misconceptions about libertarianism, and that is we're up in arms about government tyranny, but could give a rat's ass about private sector tyranny. To say this isn't accurate would be an understatement, especially when we consider the fact that a lot of situations when a private sector firm abuses its authority, it's able to get away with it because of government. If you really think about it, private sector and government tyranny go hand in hand. People often say we need regulations to protect us from big companies. Newsflash, who do you think's writing those regulations?
The argument that taxation is theft, and oh boy do I wish that ANCAPs and libertarians would try moving to Somalia for a bit.
Okay, 10 seconds into the video and we already have Argumentum ad Somalia. I think that's a new record.
But I'm here to talk about why taxation is not theft. So first of all, without the state, you have no property rights. There is no such thing as property rights. The state creates these property rights. And
we hear this argument a lot from statists that all property rights come from the state, and without the state, there'd be no property. I see a major issue with this, however. The state itself lays claim to property. Don't believe me? Try wandering onto a military base and see what happens. So it appears as if the state both creates and claims property rights. And the only logical conclusion you can draw from that is that the state created its own property rights. Why is this a problem, you ask? Well, if the state can create its own property rights, I don't see there's any reason nobody else can create their own property rights. After all, the state is simply made up of people like you and me. So either something other than the state creates property rights, or people can create their own property rights.
This is something that libertarians often stumble on. You ask them, hey, how would there be property rights without the government? And they have no answer, and they often stutter very much because they can't explain this.
Actually, libertarians have explained on numerous occasions how exactly it is you can have property rights without a state. Let's start with a fact that's both easy to understand and prove. You own yourself, by definition of yourself. I don't think most people would contest that. Now, one of the implications of that fact that you own yourself is that you also own your time and labor. If someone else owns your time and labor, then you're a slave, and you can't both be a slave and own yourself. Now, if you own your time and labor, then it would make sense to say that you own the results of your time and labor. Or to put it another way, if it's wrong to take advantage of people's time and labor directly by enslaving them, would it be any better to do so after the fact? So, to recap, starting from the self-evident premise that you own yourself, we can prove that you own your time and labor, therefore you own the results of your time and labor, therefore you're entitled to your property. Therefore, by starting with axioms and following an unbroken chain of logic, I've established, without making any sort of appeal to a state or legal authority, that you have a right to your property. Whether or not you want to argue that a state is needed to enforce this right, I've demonstrated that it's not necessary to create this right.
So the state provides the landscape of property rights and everything in it.
Even if you wanted to argue that all property rights ultimately come from the state, that still wouldn't really justify taxation. If anything, it would make it seem counterintuitive because now the state is violating the very rights it's creating.
Which means that everything that you do, you are including the state.
Actually, very little that you do on a day-to-day basis involves the state. If you really think about it, this is one of the key points that anarchists make.
So when you sign a contract with your employer or your employee or whoever, everything is attached to the state.
Actually, more often than not, it's attached to a private sector arbitration firm, because they typically do a better job of weeding out contractual issues than government courts do.
Because the state creates the whole landscape of property rights and everything that goes on in the state.
This is a classic example of the is therefore ought fallacy. Yes, it's true that a lot of these essential services are currently provided by the state. However, that doesn't mean only the state can provide them. As I mentioned a moment ago, a majority of contracts are actually arbitrated through the private sector rather than government courts. The same would go for any other mechanism that enforces property rights.
Now, also, you are receiving things in return. It is not theft if you are receiving things in return.
So you're saying if someone mugged you on the street but gave you a cold sandwich in return, that would suddenly justify it?
You are funding the police department, the fire department, the military defense, social welfare, all kinds of different infrastructure, all kinds of different things.
All these things you listed can and often are provided by the private sector, and they're usually cheaper and better quality when done so too, because unlike with taxation, you're not forced to do business with them, so they have some sort of incentive to provide a high quality at a low price.
Public roads, you can't tell me you don't use public roads.
But not everyone uses public roads. Some people walk, some people drive on private roads. Also, I should point out that private sector toll roads are on average not only better maintained, but better at managing traffic.
You can't tell me you didn't call the police, the firefighters.
While most fire departments are operated on a volunteer basis, and private sector security not only is better at stopping crime than police, but also has the added advantage of letting me grow whatever the hell I want on my own property. How many cops do you think would be out there beating the crap out of unarmed people if we had the choice not to pay for them?
The military defense is something that you can't even choose to do. That's something that defends the country.
Look at all the military operations the United States has been performing recently. Honestly, how many of those can you say are purely defensive?
From, obviously being taken over.
Well, good luck to the moron who wants to try taking over a country where 1/3 of the populace is armed.
Now, also, another thing is, you don't have to pay taxes. You can move to another country.
Well, in that case, you're just paying someone else's taxes then. Unless you move to a country that doesn't have taxes, which there's only a handful of.
Now, if you've been in the country and you've received all those goods that the government has given you.
But what if I don't use any government services? What if I use all private sector services or am self-sufficient on my own property, but my property just so happens to be within the territory of a certain government? Should I be able to just peacefully opt out?
Then yes, you have to pay taxes or you're going to have to get a punishment.
What kind of punishment exactly? Are you talking about lowering their credit score or what?
Because otherwise people wouldn't pay taxes.
So we need to threaten people with punishment if they don't pay for a particular service because they wouldn't be willing to pay for that service otherwise. Yeah, that's not making me too confident about the quality of that service.
So you don't have to pay them. You don't want to pay them? Go ahead, move to another country.
So you think people should have to go through the burden of packing up all their belongings, abandoning their property, their relationships, their friends, possibly even their family, all that hassle and expense, simply because they don't want to spend their money the way you think they should? And I love how this guy thinks it's just that easy, like the government's just going to let you leave, they're not going to make you pay to renounce your citizenship or try to make you pay the expat tax.
Just go ahead, move to another country. Maybe I suggest a libertarian utopia, Somalia. Go ahead, move there, check it out, see how it is. Let me know how it goes for you.
Is Somalia the only libertarian country you can think of? You're not going to mention Monaco, the Cayman Islands, or Hong Kong? Well, that shows how well researched this video is. I bet you've done plenty of painstaking preparation for this.
But the idea that taxation is theft is utterly laughable and honestly quite sad.
Is that so? Because I think the idea that certain people should have the right to just take your money whether or not you consent to it is laughable and sad, myself if you were to ask me. But hey, to each his own, that's what libertarians believe after all. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed this, feel free to comment and like. This has been Philosophossum, making stupidity play dead. Have a good one.